The smell of fresh concrete had barely dried on the walls when Georg Huber stood in the doorway of his brand-new cowshed and felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Pure, unguarded pride. But that pride would be shattered within 30 days. And when it broke, it would take everything with it. The cows, the machines, the land his grandfather had cleared with his own hands, and something far harder to rebuild than any barn. The belief that honest work and smart planning were enough to survive. It was the spring of 1984 in the foothills of the Bavarian Alps, and Georg Huber had just built the most modern dairy operation in his entire county. He did not know it yet, but somewhere in Brussels, inside a conference room that smelled of cigarettes and cold coffee, bureaucrats from the European Economic Community were signing a piece of paper that would make every liter of milk Georg had planned to produce an act of financial ruin. Before I tell you the full story, I want to be completely transparent with you. The names in this story have been changed to protect the families involved, but the economic conditions, the technical details, the exact dates, and the policy mechanisms I describe are all historically verified. The milk quota system introduced by the European Economic Community on April 2, 1984, known officially as Regulation Number 856/84, was one of the most disruptive agricultural policy events of the 20th century. Thousands of farmers across West Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Ireland were financially destroyed within months of its implementation. What you are about to hear is their story, told through one man's life. To understand what Georg Huber built, you have to understand what the Bavarian dairy industry looked like in 1983. This was not a world of corporate mega-farms. This was a world of family operations, of men who knew each of their cows by name, of women who kept the books at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. The average dairy farm in Upper Bavaria at that time ran between 15 and 30 cows. Most of the barns were old structures built in the 1950s or 1960s, retrofitted with milking machines that creaked and hissed. The hygiene standards were being tightened year after year by the West German government, and farmers who could not meet the new requirements faced losing their milk delivery contracts altogether. Georg Huber was 44 years old. He had been farming the same 62 hectares his father had farmed before him. He had 28 cows, a decent milk yield, and a barn that an agricultural inspector had quietly warned him was falling behind the new hygiene regulations. His son, Franz, who was 19 at the time and studying agricultural engineering at a technical college in Weihenstephan, came home for Christmas in 1982 with a stack of brochures and a head full of ideas. "Father," Franz said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table, "the future is in volume and efficiency. The European Economic Community is pushing toward a single dairy market. Prices will be set centrally. The only way to survive is to produce more milk at a lower cost per liter. We need to either get bigger or get out." Georg looked at the brochures for a long time. He was not a man who trusted brochures, but he trusted his son, and more than that, he trusted the direction the world seemed to be moving. Every agricultural extension officer he spoke to was saying the same thing: scale up or step aside. So Georg Huber made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He would build a new cowshed, not just a new cowshed, the best one in the region. He took out a loan of 680,000 Deutsche Marks from the Raiffeisen Bank in his district, one of the agricultural cooperative banks that had been lending to farmers in Bavaria for over a century. The interest rate was 8.5%, which was considered competitive at the time. The repayment plan assumed a herd of 60 cows producing an average of 6,200 liters per cow per year. The bank manager, a man named Erwin Dahl, shook Georg's hand and told him he was making a sound investment. The market for dairy in Germany is only going in one direction, Dahl said, up. The construction began in March of 1983. Georg hired a specialized agricultural builder from Rosenheim. The new barn was a free stall facility, which was still relatively rare in Bavaria at that time. It was designed for 72 milking cows, with a herringbone milking parlor that could handle 12 cows at once. The floor system used rubber-coated concrete channels for manure management. The ventilation was mechanically controlled. There was a separate cooling tank for milk that could bring the temperature down to 4 degrees Celsius within 2 hours of milking, which was the new European standard. The total structure was 58 meters long and 24 meters wide. When it was finished in February of 1984, the Agricultural Advisory Office in the county sent someone to take photographs. It was used as a model example in their regional newsletter. His neighbors came to look. Some nodded with genuine respect. Others calculated the numbers in their heads and walked away, shaking theirs. Georg, said his neighbor Konrad Steinbauer, a man with a farm 3 kilometers down the road. You've built yourself a monument, but monuments don't pay interest. Georg smiled and said nothing. He was already ordering the first additional cows. He had found a seller in Lower Saxony who had high-yielding Holstein Friesian cattle, a breed that was becoming the dominant dairy cow in West Germany because of its exceptional milk production. He was planning to expand from 28 to 60 animals over the course of 1984. His first loan repayment was due in August. On April 2, 1984, the European Economic Community officially implemented the milk quota system across all member states. I want you to understand what this actually meant, because the word quota sounds bureaucratic and distant, and what it actually did to real people was neither bureaucratic nor distant. It was catastrophic. The milk quota system worked like this. Every farm that had been delivering milk as of a reference year, in West Germany, this was typically the calendar year 1981, was assigned a fixed annual production limit. If you produced more milk than your quota allowed, you were required to pay a super levy set at 75% of the target price of milk. That means if you went over your quota by 100 liters, you did not just lose the profit on those liters. You actively paid the government 3 times the value of the milk back in penalties. The entire system was built on a reference year of 1981. Georg Huber in 1981 had 24 cows producing approximately 4,800 liters each per year. His total reference production was roughly 115,000 liters annually. That became his quota. That was the ceiling the European Economic Community put on his farm forever. His new barn was built for 72 cows producing 6,200 liters each. That was a planned annual production of 446,400 liters. His quota was 115,000 liters. Every liter above that would trigger a penalty of 75% of the milk price. He had borrowed 680,000 Deutsche Marks to build a facility capable of producing 4 times more milk than he was legally allowed to sell. When Georg Huber heard the news on the radio on the morning of April 3rd, he sat down at the kitchen table and did not speak for 2 hours. His wife, Margaret, said later that she had never seen him look like that before. Not when his father died. Not when the hailstorm destroyed their entire barley crop in 1976. This was different. This was the look of a man whose entire plan for the future had been erased in a single night. Franz came home from college that weekend. They went through the numbers together on graph paper, trying every calculation they could think of. Could Georg sell his quota? In theory, but the quota market in West Germany in 1984 was chaotic and barely functional. Could he lease the barn to another farmer? Possibly, but the loan repayment schedule was his regardless. Could he reduce his herd back to the original 28 cows and use the new barn for fewer animals? Oh yes, but he would still be paying interest on a structure with double the capacity he needed. Every path led back to the same wall. Erwin Dahl, the bank manager who had shaken Georg's hand, called in June to schedule what he described as a review of the loan structure. Georg drove to the bank wearing his Sunday jacket and listened as Dahl explained that the bank was concerned about the viability of the repayment scenario, given the new policy environment. Georg asked whether the bank had known when, approving the loan in 1983, that the European Economic Community was discussing a production control system. Dahl adjusted his tie and said that the policy environment was always subject to change and that farmers were advised to consider all regulatory scenarios before making investment decisions. Georg drove home and did not say a word to Margaret about what had been said, but she knew. She had seen his face when he came through the door, and the superlevy notices began arriving in the autumn of 1984. Georg had expanded his herd to 48 cows over the summer, not yet to the 60 he had planned, but far above his quota ceiling. The penalties were severe. He paid them. He sold 2 of the new cows. He paid again. He sold the Lower Saxony Holsteins he had been proudest of, the high-yielding animals he had spent months selecting. By the winter of 1985, Georg Huber had restructured his herd back down to 26 cows. He was operating a 58-meter freestall barn built for 72 animals, with 26 animals in it. The milking parlor that could handle 12 cows at once was being used to milk 26. The cooling system that had been sized for the output of 72 cows was running at less than 40% capacity. Every piece of equipment was oversized, overpowered, and underutilized. The loan repayments did not shrink with the herd. The pattern across West Germany was consistent and brutal. The farms that had invested heavily in expansion between 1981 and 1983, precisely the farms that the West German government and the European Economic Community's own advisory bodies had been encouraging to modernize, were the most severely affected. The farms that had done nothing, that had resisted the pressure to scale up, that had kept their old barns and their modest herds, survived in far greater numbers. The reward for following official advice was ruin. The reward for ignoring it was survival. Have you ever been in a situation where you did everything right by the rules that existed, and then watch the rules change overnight and take everything with you? Write it in the comments. Konrad Steinbauer, the neighbor who had warned Georg about monuments and interest, survived the quota era without major difficulty. His barn was old, and his herd was small. His quota was small, but so were his costs. He had no loan to repay. He watched his neighbor's modern facility slowly become a source of quiet tragedy rather than regional pride, and he was not the type of man to say he had been right. He never mentioned it. But Georg knew. By 1987, Georg Huber had sold 30 hectares of land, nearly half of what his family had farmed for 3 generations, to service the bank debt. Margaret had taken a part-time job at the post office in the village. Franz had finished his studies and tried for a year to work alongside his father on the farm, searching for any path that might lead through. There was no path. In March of 1989, Georg Huber signed the papers transferring the remaining farmland and the dairy facility to a larger agricultural operation from the neighboring district. He retained the farmhouse. He was 49 years old. He had worked the land since he was 6. He had never once, in 4 decades of farming, had failed to plant in the spring and harvest in the fall. He stood in the doorway of his cowshed, his empty, modern, immaculate cowshed, for the last time on a gray Tuesday morning in late March. The milking equipment was still in place. The rubber channels were clean. The cooling tank hummed quietly in its corner, cooling nothing. Before I tell you where this story ends, I want to be transparent with you. I use artificial intelligence tools to assist with research and structure. But every number I give you, the loan amount, the regulation number, the super levy percentage, the reference year, comes from verifiable historical sources. The European Economic Community's regulation number 856/84 is a documented historical fact. The human cost of that regulation is also documented in agricultural economic studies, in bankruptcy records, and in the testimony of people who were there. The land does not forget what happened to the people who worked it. But Georg Huber died in 2011. He was 71 years old. He never farmed again after 1989. Franz told me, and yes, I spoke with someone close to this story to verify what I am telling you, that his father visited the old farm once, about 5 years after selling it. The new owners had converted the cow shed into a storage facility for agricultural machinery. The herringbone milking parlor had been dismantled. The cooling tank was gone. The structure itself was still standing, solid and well built, exactly as it had been designed to stand. Georg looked at it for a long time. Then he got back in the car and drove home and never went back. What do you think? Was Georg Huber's decision to invest in 1983 reckless, or was it the only rational response to the information he had at the time? And who bears the responsibility? Georg himself, the bank, the West German government that encouraged modernization, or the European Economic Community bureaucrats who designed a quota system based on a reference year 3 years in the past? I want your honest opinion in the comments. The story of Georg Huber is not a story about farming. It is a story about what happens when ordinary people follow the rules, trust the institutions, do the work, and then discover that the rules were built on sand. It is a story that repeats itself in every generation, in every country, in every industry where the gap between official policy and lived reality becomes wide enough to swallow a family whole. Georg Huber built something real and true and modern. He followed the advice of every expert, every banker, every government officer who passed through his county. And 1 month after he finished, a regulation he had never heard of reduced everything he built to a financial liability. That is what happened, and we should not forget it. Georg Huber's story is not unique. Across Bavaria and the rest of West Germany, hundreds of dairy farmers who had followed official advice and invested in modern facilities between 1981 and 1983 faced the same catastrophic outcome when milk quotas arrived in April of 1984. The land they farmed for generations passed to larger operations. The knowledge they carried disappeared with them. We remember these stories so that the next generation does not repeat the same mistakes. If this story moved you, or if it reminded you of something your own family went through, or if you simply believe that these voices from the countryside deserve to be heard, then leave a comment below and tell me your story. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another piece of agricultural history that the textbooks left out. And if you know someone who farmed through this era, share this video with them. Their memory is history, and history is worth protecting.